My mom has been watching over me since the time I wanted to run away from them. She came to me and wanted to take my house for $170,000, and then she sued me. After that, my father me. Hey, Reddit. I've never written something like this before, but I feel like I need to get it all out. I've read enough posts on here to know this isn't the most unusual story in the world, but it's mine. And I've been carrying it around for way too long. I don't even know what I'm looking for. Maybe just a way to make sense of the chaos. Anyway, here goes. I guess I should start with the beginning, which is always the hardest part to admit. I grew up in a small, suffocating town in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't much to look at except miles of open fields and cracked roads that felt like they were leading to nowhere. My parents, let's just call them Jill and Mark, were the kind of people who shouldn't have had kids. I didn't realize it then, but now looking back, it's all too obvious. From the outside, everything seemed picture perfect. Dad had a decent job at the local factory, and Mom was one of those women who spent way too much time keeping up appearances. Always telling me to smile more, stand up straight, and make sure I didn't embarrass her. But behind closed doors, it was a whole different story. Mom was the puppet master, controlling every move, every decision, and every thought. I couldn't breathe without her telling me I was doing it wrong. The abuse wasn't always physical, though there were moments. Like the time I dropped a glass at dinner and she slapped me so hard I saw stars. But it was mostly mental, psychological. The way she would cut me down with her words, make me feel like I was worthless. She had this way of looking at me like I was nothing. Like I was this embarrassing broken thing that she didn't know how to fix. I think the worst part was how good she was at making everything seem normal to everyone else. She wore her perfect mother mask so well that no one could ever suspect what was happening. Dad was no better. He wasn't abusive in the traditional sense, but he was absent in all the ways that mattered. He'd sit in his chair after work, nursing a beer and staring blankly at the TV while I stood in the kitchen listening to Mom rant about how I wasn't good enough. I could never live up to her expectations. My grades weren't high enough. I wasn't social enough. I didn't play sports like the other boys. She'd tell me I was too soft, too weak, and that no girl would ever want to be with me. I started believing it after a while. I mean, if your own mother doesn't love you, who will? The house was a minefield. I never knew what would set her off. One day it was the fact that I didn't clean my room properly, and another day it was because I got a B on a math test. She was obsessed with perfection and I was her biggest disappointment. I think that's what she hated most about me. That I wasn't the golden child she could parade around like a trophy. Instead, I was this awkward, shy kid who just wanted to disappear. I started counting the days until I could get out, but every time I thought about running, something held me back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the fact that no matter how awful they were still my parents. School wasn't much better. It was a small town high school where everyone knew each other. And if you didn't fit into one of the pre-assigned boxes, you were as good as invisible. Or worse, a target. I was the latter. I didn't have the confidence to stand up for myself. So I became the kid everyone picked on. If I wasn't being shoved into lockers, I was being laughed at in the cafeteria. Teachers didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. I was just another awkward kid who didn't belong anywhere. I was invisible at home, and I was invisible at school. It felt like I was fading away, bit by bit, and no one would even notice if I disappeared completely. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of escaping. I knew I had to get out of that town. I had to get away from my parents, from everything that reminded me of them. So I buried myself in my studies. It was the only thing I had control over. I figured if I could get good enough grades, maybe I could get into a decent college and finally get away. I worked my ass off, staying up late at night, poring over textbooks, ignoring the sounds of Mom yelling at Dad downstairs. It was my ticket out and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I got into a state university, which was my first real victory.